Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by Richard Muggs McGinnis, PhD in oceanography?
Biology.
Biology.
Yeah.
Oceanographer.
Taught oceanography.
Taught oceanography for many years.
Worked with deep sea stuff.
One of my mentors. He's traveled the South Pacific. He's been through the Straits of Magellan on a clear day.
Yeah.
You used to be able to tell the ecological zone of deep sea fish by the smell, if I recall, just by bringing them up.
Well, no, you could tell they're very flaccid when they're deep.
Right.
The reason is if you live in the light, you got to have a lot of muscles.
Right.
Right. If you're big,
Yeah.
if you're anything over an inch or so, or a couple inches, and the deeper you go, there's no light, and so there's no full. They're not on full alert all the time.
Right, because they can't be seen.
Yeah.
That was one of your favorite studies, was how they figured out and parsed out.
James Childress at Santa Barbara did it. Comparative study of things that lived at different depths. It's a great comparative study.
Yeah. For the audit, for maybe the uninitiated, how deep is the average ocean over the abyssal plain?
It's about 4,000 meters, I believe.
That's close to 4 kilometers.
Yeah.
I think it's us landlubbers. It's fairly difficult to appreciate just how big, how deep, and how alien the ocean is.
How alien. And all people have to do is look at the creatures that are collected down there, and they can see how alien it is.
Right.
You know, the luminescence, the baits on the anglerfish, and the teeth, and it's amazing.
Using light to camouflage yourself and counter camouflage.
Yeah, if you're up in the dimmer light, then of course they have photophores, light organs along the ventral side that match their daylight depth, and they can. Yeah, it's amazing. And then most of them migrate at that depth. They migrate up and down. They come up to the surface and then down. And that's again to avoid predators up in that shallow water.
Right. We forget that we are the aliens compared to them, since that's one of the largest ecosystems in the world.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Is completely dark, very cold.
Yeah.
No gravity, no no photosynthesis.
No photosynthesis.
It's just living off of what's drifting down from below.
That's right. Yeah.
The largest animal migration in the world happens every night over the ocean.
That vertical migration, it does.
Everything else pales in comparison to that.
It is.
Huge herds of antelope moving across Africa, that's nothing
compared to that.
Little jellied. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the most abundant fish in the ocean, larval-wise, are these midwater fish, mactophids, lanternfish. Their larvae are more abundant than the sardine family in terms of numbers of larvae that are collected. And they migrate up and down. Most of them do, not all. But most of them that live at intermediate depths down to several hundred meters, they'll go down several hundred and then come up. And it's a continuous migration, too, because the sun is always going up and coming down somewhere.
Right.
So you can follow it around the globe.
Yeah, it's this kind of standing wave right at dusk.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a bit after dusk.
Yeah.
They all rise up. Here's one. Have they done studies on how effectively it cleans out the plankton, the phytoplankton from the day? Is there a pattern? Because, I mean, all of a sudden, I would assume the predation rates, the sun goes down, the jelly stuff rises up.
Yeah.
I would assume there's all of a sudden a greater density of predators, of plankton.
Yeah, they're eating bigger stuff.
Yeah.
They're eating bigger stuff. Most of the mortality of the phytoplankton comes from viruses. And bacteria. And bacteria going after the what they call the microbial loop, something that when I first started teaching biological oceanography, we didn't even know about.
Didn't even know.
And so in the 70s and 80s, they figured out that a lot of this energy is being recycled within the system at a very small level.
Right.
So the biomass of those bacteria and viruses, the numbers are just boggle the mind. I don't remember.
10 billion for every liter.
Or something like that.
10 billion viruses.
Yeah. I mean,
liter.
It's just when you say 10 billion, wow. So.
And what's 1 liter? It's a bottle of beer,
Yeah, and of course that's part of the human problem is that we always think of things on our scale of lifetime and size, whereas most of what's happening is on a longer lifestyle and time span, as well as on a much smaller scale.
Right. And also, it's Again, it's kind of like trying to contemplate infinity. If you think of, if I recall the ratio of, it's about 10 to 1. So in 1 liter of seawater, you have 1 billion bacteria and 10 billion viruses.
Yeah.
That's a lot of DNA.
Yeah.
That's a lot of mutations that can happen, that evolution can work with. There's a whole lot of material there for evolution to churn and work with.
Right.
And if you think of that happening in every liter of seawater, every minute of the day, statistically, you realize it kind of has to even out. You can't postulate the question of, well, why isn't there a mutation that makes a bacteria that's better at photosynthesis than all the others? You think that doesn't happen every 4 seconds?
Yeah.
Right?
That's true. That's true.
So
Yeah.
it's optimized.
Yeah.
The DNA can't do anymore because it's almost like feeding infinity into the equation. What
Yeah.
if you had an infinite amount of mutations over an infinite amount of time? Because there were 10 billion viruses in the ocean 1 million years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it can't be any different.
Yeah.
Evolution can't do any more with it.
No.
You know?
No.
It's-
No, and then well, of course until the environment changes, and then
Yes.
once the environment changes, that's when selection pressures change,
yeah.
and then that's when you can get rapid evolution. Actually,
Yes. It's you know, if evolution is the lathe of heaven, you notice it when it really is cutting. You know, when the environment changes,
Yeah.
when the equilibrium shifts, then you can see changes in a population and go, oh, 100,000 years ago, the birds could fly, and then they landed on an island, and now they can't. Now it's a flightless bird. That's evolution cutting very quickly.
Yeah.
But if conditions are the same for a long period of time, and organisms, plant or animal, fungus or bacteria or virus, if they've optimized, then it's like the lathe is very smooth. The blade just hits the surface, and since it's already optimized, all it does is trim off bad
Yeah.
mutations,
Yeah.
and so you can't see anything change in the organism itself.
Yeah. Well, there have been some changes in the past.
Of course.
Like for example, still when we say fast, we don't mean overnight. We're talking maybe hundreds of generations,
Yeah.
for flightlessness.
Oh yeah.
But there are new events like from RNA to DNA.
Oh boy.
DNA replicates more truthfully. It's got better digital system than RNA, or with the evolution of recombination and sex. That's what
Right.
sex is to a biologist is recombination of DNA, and of course then that could speed things up. And that's when,
Oh yeah.
with the evolution of that, is when the opportunities for more diversification were contingent on the evolution of that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of, dragonflies looked and behaved essentially the same 100 million years ago. Dragonflies were old before there were Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Right.
Dragonflies were old before the Himalayan mountains even existed.
Yeah.
Mount Rainier is only 3 million years old.
It's
Dragonflies were fluttering around. You could go back in time to before mammals, and you could look up and see something that you said, "Oh, that's a dragonfly."
That's a dragonfly. Yeah.
So it's the continuity.
Yeah.
Here's a dragonfly, and it's next to a land animal that crawled out of the sea,
Yeah.
and went extinct 150 million years ago.
Yeah.
The dragonflies are still here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That amphibian that crawled out of the sea became us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If there was anything, if you were given a lot of money and like studio backing and a studio full of animators who could draw things out and a budget to spend, what would you use that for? What would you like to explain to the general public about the oceans? What would be your top thing, the message you would really like to get across?
We're in trouble. I mean, we're really in trouble.
Yeah.
In terms of overfishing regional areas with too many nutrients going into the water.
Yeah.
Global expansion due to heat of the ocean. Thermal expansion as well as rising sea levels due to influx of water to the coastal communities, the polar communities. And I mean, we're in trouble. And overfishing, we've known about it for decades.
Oh, geez,
yeah. I mean, it hit a peak. And what we've done is, the way it was explained or described, is we're fishing down the food web in the ocean.
Yes.
What the higher levels we've taken out, we're fishing down, whereas with the farming system, we're moving up. In order to feed those things higher in the food chain in the farms, we have to harvest stuff in the ocean. And so regional areas are so impacted by that, especially Southeast Asia.
So you're talking trophic levels. We are with wild trophic levels.
Mm-hmm.
We have fished out the big fish, the old fish, the marlins, the sailfish.
Yeah. Right.
And we're now hunting the smaller fish, but we're also hunting the smaller fish for aquaculture.
That's right.
To feed salmon and things.
Which is not as efficient.
It ain't.
Yeah.
It's not efficient.
Yeah.
Let's say that.
And of course, it's difficult to solve because there's economic interests and people make their living. I mean, I'm not talking just about the big companies, but communities like, that have that. And what you need is, I'm a proponent of science and knowledge informing our actions and decisions. Yeah. And then helping those that are affected by those decisions.
Right.
So, I mean, of course, the message needs not to go to the general people. It needs to go to the leaders.
Yeah.
I used to think that, education would help. And, you have great programs on television that talk about these things, Nova and Nature and other things, and David Attenborough that talk. Yeah, and BBC. You have this, and that reaches the clientele, but it doesn't get through to the leaders, except I think in some countries. I think England more so. I mean, they have a strong tradition of natural history with Darwin and Attenborough and others, but I think in the United States, I think most of our leaders don't pay attention to any of that.
Yeah.
They're worried about how their party's doing, how their own election is doing it's either a 2-year, 4-year, or 6-year, so I don't know, how do you reach the leaders? And I guess that's through vote. That's why you would go to the general people. But how do you get them to it's out there already.
Correct. Yeah. They're screaming their heads off about it.
Yeah.
I also don't, when I see bottom up change, from my understanding of history, it's not it's not beneficial usually, bottom up change. It's usually the system breaking, not bending and everybody voted to protect the oceans in the 2024 election.
Yeah.
That's not a platform. That's not about power sharing in a government.
No. So it's really it's a dilemma, and there are a lot of people. I mean, there's a lot of environmental groups and groups that are trying, and scientific groups that are trying to get the message out about and just with Attenborough, if people could just see the wonder of it all.
Yeah.
If you could get people to wonder and look at this stuff and see it not as a Disney thing, but as a real life natural history.
I mean, but 99.9% of people are not as lucky as you and I, and cannot ever afford to touch a sea lion. I've swum with manta rays in the Galapagos Islands. Now that I think about it, I'm like, maybe they should designate one of the islands as the tourist one, and the rest just have to be off limits because we're killing it. It's the same with Antarctica.
Yeah,
this Antarctic tourism drives me bonkers.
Yeah,
and I've never been there.
Yeah,
so at least, unlike my case with the Galapagos, I'm not a hypocrite.
Yeah,
I am a hypocrite about the Galapagos, but we can't have tourism in the Antarctic.
Yeah.
It's the last one left. It's the last pristine place left, and we're stomping all over it, just like everywhere else.
Yeah.
One thing I think is difficult to understand between the oceans and the land is that environmental damage on land is fairly self-contained. I can cut down all the trees in one valley. It will not cause deforestation in the valley next over, unless there's some incredibly weird circumstance. But with the oceans, you can do something on one end of it, and one end of the Pacific, and it will affect things on the other.
Yeah.
The connectivity is so much harder. It's so much stronger, the ecological connections, and they're so much longer. like the long distance. A whale can hunt in the Antarctic during the summer and then go and release nutrients into the Pacific during the tropical Pacific.
Sure. Yeah. No, but I mean, on an ocean-wide scale, is teleconnection. One of the things with climate change that scientists worry about, I haven't read about this in some time now, but with the warming in the Arctic, you get this less dense water sitting on top of and so when the Gulf Stream comes up, it doesn't mix with the saltier water and sink and provide the pump that moves all of the deep water in the ocean, basically, from down to the Antarctic, and then it sinks there because of the cold, and with that changing. So it looks like this wind-driven circus. That's not a wind-driven circulation. That's driven by density. The wind, apparently, I read recently that's speeding up. Ocean surface currents are speeding up. Well, it makes sense. You have more energy and more temperature contrast, and that's what drives the wind. And that wind is what drives the currents. Yeah. And so what effects those will have?
We don't know.
We don't know.
Not in the long run. I read a book by Peter Ward at the University of Washington called Under a Green Sky, where he challenged the narrative of science after the discovery of the meteor strike that wiped out the KT extinction event, the meteor strike, and he followed how it bled into mainstream media. And so suddenly it became the idea that all mass extinctions are caused by meteor strikes, and he looked at that, and he was looking at chemical signatures of older extinction events, since the meteor strike is the most recent. We have about 5 others to study, and this is kind of distressing, but it seems that the meteor strike is the exception to the rule, and maybe one of the causes of previous extinction events like the Permian, which is the big one, or the Ordovician, or the Triassic, Jurassic one, is the eruption of absolutely massive volcanic fields that release a lot of greenhouse gases that cuts it, and that the release of the greenhouse gases causes so much global warming that it reduces the temperature gradient between the equator and the poles, so much so that the oceans stop flowing.
Yeah.
The conveyor belt of the oceans stop shutting down because there's no heat pump driving heat from the equator where it's warm to the poles, because they're the same temperature.
Yeah.
What happens when the oceans shut down?
Oh, anoxic.
So now you have 4 kilometers of water with no oxygen in it.
Yeah.
And then big bubbling, enormous bubbles of methane and hydrogen sulfide start coming up, because there's a thin, tiny layer where photosynthesis can still occur, where there's a little bit of oxygen.
Very thin,
like an inch.
Yeah.
So under a green sky means the hydrogen sulfide fries your ozone layer.
Yeah. It's acidic. It becomes acidic.
The oceans become purple because they're full of anaerobic purple sulfur bacteria.
Yeah. No, but you said recently you can cut. That's true in the ocean, but on land. But if you cut a valley, but if you cut the Amazon basin, which is what's happening, and even in the Chinese, if you look at the the pollen record in China, you can see with certain episodes where all of a sudden there's an increase in sediment. And where they deforested during these times. And, wars and battles require a lot of resources, including our trees for fuel and smelting, and boats for going down the rivers to conquer the rest of China, stuff like that. But you can actually see these episodes of increase in sediment. And, of course, with the deforestation, you have less transpiration by those plants. And so further downwind, China is just like the United States. As you go inward, it gets drier. And so what happens? It gets drier and drier, and you get increased desertification.
Oh, interesting.
So I mean, it depends on the scale, and of course, with now 7 billion people on the planet, and more need for palm oil and food, and it's not like there's some evil person controlling it.
Far from it.
No, it's just this is what evolution and history have provided us.
Yeah, you see these just wretched examples of a game warden, breaking up a poacher's camp in East Africa, or a park ranger confiscating some 40-year-old woman who's burning charcoal in a national park in Uganda or something, and it's like, she's the problem, She's working. Do you know how much work she had to do just to make that fucking bag of charcoal so she could sell it for 2 cents in a market?
So she could eat.
So she could feed her kids.
Yeah.
So she had to carry it 10 miles on her back. Yeah. She's the problem. It's so
or for these guys shooting the ivory, there's the demand.
Of course.
Yeah, and they're also trying to provide.
They are.
And of course, you have the corrupt I think they're corrupt middlemen and these egotistical consumers.
Right.
I mean, it's just, and they don't recognize.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, that it's not the poacher, it's not the woman.
It's not.
That's the problem.
And look where she lives. She and her ancestors, quite possibly, were living on the edge of that. Now it's a national park. For how long? 400 years? Sustainably.
Yeah.
It was the market, and it was capitalism and colonialism that changed them, not the other way around. They were doing fine.
That's exactly right.
It was us. It was European style civilization that came and said, oh no, you have to sell it for money now. You have to monetize everything. And it's like, we've been growing food and doing fine for generations, and we poisoned them and their relationship.
And of course, at the same time, we dehumanize them.
Of course.
Otherize them and treat them as subhuman.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been going on for centuries.
Yeah, since Columbus.
It's pretty depressing.
It's when the oceans go anoxic, in a technical way, it's not the end of the world. It's a mass extinction. Not all life on land goes extinct, and in some corners, some shallow, windy places, life does hold on. But
well, it's rebounded every time in the past.
Rebounded every time.
Yeah, every mass extinction.
Yeah.
Diversity comes back, sometimes a little faster. When I say fast, we're talking hundreds of thousands or millions of years. And so it's not, but on a geologic time scale, it's relatively quick.
Sure. Yeah.
So a time scale is one thing that's very hard for people to, where these 5, average feet, height of 5 feet, used to live for an average of 50 years, and we can't think of time or at all from that perspective.
Yeah. What we do is we impose our social universe on the broader universe.
Yeah.
The types of relationships we have with other conscious beings, our fellow human, we don't have any other lens to view the world through most of the time, unless you've been educated in that scientific worldview. And so it's just extremely difficult to walk on a mountain and think, this mountain, if it's an old one, it might have been here 40 million years. Think of all the things that have come and gone. Our little lives are like gusts of wind, that blow across that mountain. And I wish life was more resilient. It is in a technical sense. Like, we're going to go through hell over the next few centuries, and all of those social narratives that we've imposed, the ones we've inherited, like colonialism and racism, but also the ones we impose where it's like, we can do it. All we have to do is think our way out of this system. It's like, nature doesn't care what you think.
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
Nature doesn't give a whit.
Here's another one about the oceans.
Yeah.
I learned this just recently. If ice is up on land, it's relatively stable because it's supported by something even materially stronger than it, like a rock. And so if the temperature goes up, it has to melt. If the ice has formed and become very thick, like a couple of miles thick or 3 miles
produces
thick,
heat.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
but it depresses the earth beneath it, because the earth is kind of squishy at its upper levels in the mantle and all that.
Right.
If it depresses it below sea level, the ice is now confronted with a system where it wants to float, and so it's the Archimedes principle of the mass of water displaced by the ice has to be greater than it has to at least equal the mass of ice has to equal the mass of water displaced. If the water's too great, it will float the ice. The other thing about ice is that it is not very strong materially. So you can have cliffs of stone, granite or something, that are maybe 1,000 feet high, but ice tops out at about 300 feet maximum. After that, it disintegrates. It just breaks apart. You can't pile ice so thick that you can't have 1,000-foot high cliff of ice. It's not materially possible, any more than you could have a 1,000-foot high cliff of sand. In West Antarctica, you're in the situation where that has happened. You have about a 2 to 3 mile thick sheet of ice that has depressed the earth below sea level, in some places up to a mile below sea level. And so you have marine ice shelf instability going on. So it's a very delicate balance. Because what you have to realize is that it didn't form when the ice sheet formed, it was not below sea level. The snow kept piling up. The ice got thicker and thicker. It's flowing out to sea, but the earth is also depressing. And so the people who are looking at this are going, "Oh my, oh dear, oh dear," because the outflow glaciers of it, the Thwaites Glacier and a few others, are starting to disintegrate, and they have been for about 5 years. They're speeding up. Because of climate. So the warm weather, the climate change has lowered the amount of snow accumulating, and it's increased the melting rate. But as it disintegrates, it's going backwards into deeper and deeper water. It's actually the ice is at sea level on land where it goes out to the ocean. It's like a bowl. And then underneath it goes deeper.
So that warmer water comes in.
The warmer water comes in, but that's just the trigger mechanism. When it actually starts to disintegrate, it's not melting. It's mechanically disintegrating.
Okay.
The ocean lifts a layer and it breaks apart and flows out. And now you've got a cliff 600 feet high, so it disintegrates. And then it goes back and back, because if you were like a knife with a cake to just slice the West Antarctic ice sheet down, you're looking at a 4,000 foot sheer cliff of ice. That's mechanically impossible. The ice can't do that. So when they started plugging in this mechanical disintegration mechanism, they were able to accurately reconstruct ancient sea level rises when ice ages ended in the past, where the evidence was that sea levels rose quite quickly. Like in 10 years, they might have risen 20, 30 feet. But the mathematics couldn't work because they were trying to make it melt, not break. It's begun.
There's a tipping point. Once it starts,
we're past
it gets faster. Well, we're past it. I mean, and also in the Arctic with the methane that's trapped in the tundra, the permafrost.
Positive feedback.
Positive feedback. You once it starts to warm, you have less reflection from the snow. Starts to warm, more methane, more heating.
Dark soil.
So it just heats and heats and heats. So you get this positive feedback, and the same down there. Now, once that water comes in, it's just gonna.
It'll disintegrate that ice sheet until it gets back to sea level land. It will lift the entire bowl slowly, not in one piece, from the edge, just grind it up.
But if anybody doubts whether the ice pushes this down, all they can do is, if you go around, particularly closer to Canada, where the ice was much thicker, that was here 10,000 years ago, it pushed that down. You can find marine fossils up a couple hundred feet up in the sediments, up above sea level now. So
Norway and Sweden are still rebounding by an inch or two a year. You know, the Earth is pulling back up, because the ice can deform it quickly. The ice can break up much more quickly than the Earth can rebound. Would that it was like a trampoline where the Earth just goes boop, because then it would match, then it would equalize. But instead, that's not what happens.
Yeah.
So we're confronted with a situation where if it really starts getting underway in West Antarctica, maybe in 15 years, you might be looking at a situation where in 12 months, in 18 months, sea levels are going to rise 25 feet.
Yeah. And for listeners that are doing this, if you're skeptical about that, go look, get on the computer, look at the experts.
Yeah.
Right. Find out what they're saying. Find out who they cite. Find out who might even be debating them a little bit, and see if there might be some. Yeah. There's going to be skepticism. If the scientists are never absolutely certain, that's what makes it so great. Yeah. Unlike religions and ideologies where there is this certainty, and see if you can persuade yourself by the information and by what the arguments are in the data. This is what the listeners should do. Yeah. Yeah. Because what we need reasoning, thinking people that are looking for evidence to come to solutions for some problems that are immense.
Right. Well, or not, Muggs. Maybe they'll just drown.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
Because what are you going to do? What if it's the oceans are rising? Let's reason and think. Yeah, well, about what?
No, but I'm talking about the listener out there.
Of course.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I don't think that's going to necessarily solve the problem, but it's going to help to persuade themselves and use their own facilities. I mean, here we have this gift that evolution gave us. We're capable of reason and love, but we're also capable of unreason and hate. Yeah. But we are capable of that and of knowing our own history.
Yeah. Know thyself.
Yeah.
I wonder about that. If you're going to say, well, we have to evacuate the coastline. That's a very tough thing for leadership to tell its people.
Yeah.
But I wonder when they talk about these ghost cities that they've been building in China. They build a city and nobody's there. Yeah. How many of them are at sea level?
Yeah. Well, Shanghai has problems with salt.
It already does.
Not only does ice.
I'm talking about the ghost cities that they're building. I'm like, I really do wonder if they're building any of them within some parameter. Because most of them are inland. Yeah. Wouldn't that be a sight?
Yeah. Well, you talk about ice depressing the crust. Yeah. Cities do. Shanghai sinks. You build a big city like that, it starts to sink. And when it sinks, salt water starts to creep in further. Yeah. And so a lot of these cities are, it's a huge problem. China has a huge water problem. And they try to solve it on a massive scale, an unbelievable scale. You think the Great Wall was a massive thing? Yeah. What they're doing with water, with the dams and the rechanneling water and stuff.
South to north.
South to north. It's just on a scale that you wouldn't.
Yeah. I've been sorely tempted, and the amount of work for somebody like me with wastewater experience in China right now. Man, if you have a wastewater operator's license, they're probably, I would hope they're just throwing money at you because they need to do it now.
Well, they have to.
Yeah. But it's. Here we are again, talking about mass extinctions. It's funny. I have a little. We talk about solutions. And my work is boring. I'm gonna throw these at you.
Okay.
You who my former teacher and mentor. Some good. This is a booklet of various. Just throwing really silly ideas out there. Drill and spray on a massive scale on permanent ice caps during the winter to thicken it in order to pull water from the ocean up onto the land again in a place like Greenland or Antarctica. Floating bamboo forests. Floating pelagic fish shelters, woven jute fiber, etc. Would that help juvenile habitat or adult pelagic fish?
Well, I'm not the one. That's where you really need an expert for things like that.
Of course you do.
Yeah. This is where expertise counts.
And actually doing the study, because there's so many good intentions of like, we should do this. Yeah. And oh shit.
Yeah. And first of all, you need the knowledge, and then you need the engineering. Yeah. And engineers are an important part of that too. And so that's where you have to rely on the best evidence and the best models and the best engineering. I don't really think we're going to I hope we engineer. I hope the liquid salt works, I mean, as an engineering solution to many of our problems, you know. I mean, based on good rigid science. I mean,
right.
I mean,
yeah. We should get into that later, but the molten salt, everything we do is powered right now by fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So if you're going to sit there and say, well, we need to do a mass engineering project for the world's oceans to make a lot of habitat for fish,
yeah,
for baby fish, so that we can counteract some of the effects of overfishing.
Yeah.
Okay, benthic fish houses, there's one. You know,
Yeah.
seafloor fish habitat, fish houses like bird houses. Give hard holdfasts to kelp if the bottom is too muddy in natural kelp habitat areas.
Well, I think what the best thing to do is what they've tried to do and have shown works in many cases is that you establish reserves.
Yes.
Then this is where the larval fish can then, because almost all fish that are commercially important in the ocean have pelagic tiny larvae that
Yes.
drift around in the plankton.
Yes.
So if you have reserves and enough of them, and you regulate the fishery intensity, that's what that's
the easiest one. Just don't go there.
Yeah.
And then the big fish, and then the little fish can grow up to big mama fish.
Yeah.
And make a lot of eggs.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do any sort of mass engineering thing, with our current energy regime, it's still powered by fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So go ahead and do your mass engineering.
Yeah.
Go ahead and sink a lot of ships to become reefs.
Yeah.
You're still pumping CO2 into the atmosphere.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of a moot point.
It is. Yeah.
But I don't want to get into the molten salt reactor. We'll save that.
No, I
one
mean,
for
I'm just
later.
saying, but
Yes.
that's an engineering. This is where there could be an engineering solution, and there are engineering
Right.
solutions. But for the ocean, I mean, they're even going to start mining they're talking about mining these extensive manganese nodules
Yeah.
down at a couple thousand meters, and
Right.
Because they have precious minerals,
Yeah.
and of course there aren't any commercial fish down at that depth.
No.
But still, if the energy that would be required to do that,
Right. It's funny to think about engineering the oceans. That's a sentence we can make, and it's an idea we can hold in our mind. But I think about that, and I think about the kind of myths and stories we tell ourselves that define what we're capable of doing and imagining. What's economically acceptable and what isn't. Because we can't even engineer a good city.
yeah.
And so the scale of what we're approaching, and in the historical record, it's very interesting. You can get human ideologies are brittle. They're very brittle because they are often faith-based. So you can get people to work and fight and die for very abstract things, like Rome or Assyria.
Yeah.
But getting them to do something simple like, you don't get to eat top predator fish like marlin and sailfish. You have to eat things lower on the trophic level like mussels and oysters and stuff. Still delicious.
Yeah.
They're cleaning the ocean. You're never going to damage much habitat, especially if you do aquaculture very right. They're like, no, I want my salmon. I want my sailfish steak.
Sure.
And it's like, you are willing, look at, Americans are willing to fly across the planet to go and occupy Afghanistan. And it's like, don't tell me we're not able to work hard.
Yeah.
Don't tell me we're not able to try difficult things.
Yeah.
We're trying to tell Muslim civilization what to do.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
So don't tell me we can't work hard.
Yeah.
But if you present them with the choice, look at the backlash against the Impossible Burger.
Yeah.
Meatless meat.
Yeah.
There's literally people who are like, fuck that.
Yeah.
You're eating vegetables. That's what you're mad about?
Yeah.
You're okay with spending trillions of dollars on an aircraft carrier, or an aircraft carrier system or whatever. You're okay with having military bases in the middle of fucking Afghanistan to accomplish nothing.
Yeah.
Yet you can't make the jump to a meatless burger.
Yeah.
Isn't that astonishing?
Yeah, or like you say, the filter feeders and eating off the floor.
Yeah, you're gonna eat sardines instead of salmon.
Yeah.
You know,
And it's
you can't have ivory anymore.
Yeah.
You know, and people are like, no, and so like that's the line you're gonna draw in the sand. A petty appetite.
yeah.
I like beef.
Yeah.
Beef is the worst meat you could possibly eat,
Yeah.
outside of like tuna.
Not only just for you, for the planet.
Yeah, both.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah.
It is the least. I've studied farming and stuff. You know, it is 10 to 1. The feed to, you know, you have to spend 10 units of feed to make one goddamn unit of beef. With chicken, it's like 2 to 1.
Yeah.
Or like 3 to 1.
Yeah.
Pork, it's like 4 to 1.
Yeah.
I'm raising 4 pigs right now, feeding them garbage, you know, like something that would have been compost otherwise. And if you try telling somebody that they can't eat beef anymore,
Yeah.
and they'll sit there and scream bloody murder. It blows my. I eat beef, by the way.
Yeah, well, I mean,
You know?
but it's ingrained in the American consciousness.
Yeah.
The Western movies and the
Yeah.
and the.
But that's what we're doing it for.
Yeah, sure. It's
It's worth it.
it's
Slurry ponds of beef shit and soil erosion and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is worth it. It is worth the steak
yeah,
for you to eat your fucking burger.
yeah,
That's what's worth it to you.
yeah. It's kind of hard to imagine, isn't it?
You know, like in a Christian example, it'd be like, well, you could go to heaven, or here's $10.
Yeah.
Oh, $10. I mean, an infinity of orgasmic pleasure with God. That's nice, but $10.
Yeah. So.
You know,
Yeah.
because here we are. We're looking. Sea level rise of 10 feet wipes out over 25% of your farmland.
Yeah.
You've just displaced well over 1 billion people.
A billion people. Yeah.
A wave of water washes up in the shore, and then a wave of humans washes inland. What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Is there going to be a lot of conflict? And that's the problem.
More people are going to die fighting each other over the remaining resources than if we cooperated now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, it's
Here's another one. I saw, you'll like this one. There was a very simple, very elegant study about how certain types of rock that are relatively rare on the Earth's surface, but by relative I mean it's still a rock on the Earth's surface, so there's a lot of it. There's mountains and mountains of it.
yeah.
When it undergoes chemical weathering in the ocean, in the atmosphere, or in the oceans, it combines with carbon dioxide and buries it geologically.
Yeah, calcium carbonate.
Calcium carbonate.
Yeah.
You've got this.
Yeah.
So a guy did a very simple study of looking at these types of rocks and how to put them with weathering. And he calculated that if you took 7 cubic kilometers of this type of rock, they're ultramafic rocks, serpentinite, a few others, just for olivine weathering.
They're from the upper part of the mantle and the
Yes.
lower. Yeah.
Right. If you could do it either by pulverizing it and throwing it in highly erosive environments in the ocean where there's heavy tides and things on the coasts and whatnot, or you could put it on poor quality tropical soils that need things like magnesium and whatnot, potassium in the soil. You'd need to move 7 cubic kilometers a year, and it would counteract ocean acidification year by year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a hopeful thing.
Yeah.
You would have to put more than that to bring us back to where we were from all that we've emitted so far, starting with the Industrial Revolution. But then go figure, it's just a bigger number.
Yeah.
But after that, if we emit it at the level we emit carbon dioxide today, dump 7 cubic kilometers a year into the oceans, and all of a sudden you have balanced the pH of the ocean.
Yeah.
7 cubic kilometers a year is about how much mining we do already.
Yeah.
Between coal, limestone.
And if you add gravel to that, it's a lot more.
I'm sure it probably is.
Yeah. If you go for gravel quarries, I mean, that would
Right.
increase the volume tremendously. But
Yes.
yeah.
So it's not, these things are not magic. They are not again, we are
They're
willing.
they're not pie in the sky.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
What's pie in the sky is the idea that, well, if the economy grows a few more years, we'll just figure it all out.
Yeah.
You know.
Or somebody might object to the expense, right, of doing it. But
Yes.
then you ask yourself, how many cubic meters of gold have actually been taken out of the earth? Probably not that many cubic meters.
It's about 2 swimming pools full.
Yeah, I mean that's so. What you could have one truck running a day to fill it, right?
Yeah.
I mean that's all it would take. And
Yeah.
how much money have we spent digging out that gold?
Gold is the one thing that is magic. It's this magic metal that makes people go crazy.
I mean, it's just. But think about that.
Yeah.
You know, you see these. I mean, well, you've seen it.
Yes.
You've seen what they do.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, they take these huge areas that they swath. But I mean, it's all. I just meant that in the context. If
course.
you have so many cubic miles or whatever it is that you have to move, think about
Do
how
it.
much has been moved to get to that little bit of gold.
Exactly. That's what I mean when I say we project our social universe onto the broader one. Gold is magic. John Maynard Keynes, I always is it Keynes or Keynes?
I think it's Keynes.
Keynes, he said, well, when times are good economically, a government should use its tax base to bury gold.
Yeah.
And then, so during the bad times, as an employment scheme, you can let people dig it back up again. And he's fucking right when you really think about
Yeah.
it. Here's this magic thing you have, and what it does is it unlocks human labor. It's
Yeah.
a store of human labor. It can make people do amazing things.
Yeah.
As an aside, Attila the Hun required about 350 pounds of gold a year from the Eastern Roman Empire when he was milking them, extorting them, right? How much volume do you think that is?
Not much. A bathtub?
2 gallons.
2 gallons.
Not even a bathtub, far less than a bathtub.
Yeah.
2 gallons of gold. So that the trope, the stereotype of the Wild West guy robbing a stagecoach and then he's got bags of gold and he throws it on his donkey. Bullshit.
Yeah.
Bullshit. 350 pounds. You know? And the Romans had to do it because he had a better military.
Yeah.
What are they exchanging? You know.
Yeah.
I mean, if Attila the Hun had asked his soldiers to practice soil conservation and make the world a better place and build a better future for their children, they would have revolted and killed him. But if he asked them to do something like attack the Roman Empire and squeeze them for gold, they're fine with it.
Oh, I have to laugh.
If our government asked the American people to build a brighter future for essentially eternity, and in North America, restore the bison, get the forests replanted, blah, 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 we would revolt.
Go to renewable energy and
Right.
yeah.
But if we say, let's spend $1.5 trillion on an airplane that's a piece of shit, well, okay, well, that's fine. So here we go. The calculations that people have been making with this molten salt reactor, they think if you make the cheapest and most robust one, beginning to end, the cost of replacing all the coal, natural gas, hydroelectric dams, satisfying all the world's energy needs with no carbon dioxide in perpetuity would be a one-time $3 trillion bill, and then you're good to go
Boy.
for the next 40,000 years.
Wow.
$3 trillion. So half the cost of the F-35 jets. Way to spend your money, folks.
Yeah.
Another one I read was, I'm glad to use this example, even though you're not ever supposed to bring up Adolf Hitler. When he was jump-starting the German economy, right after he got put in power in 1933, he was just printing money. He was writing coupons for people and blah, 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 but it was all about military spending. And talking to Volkswagen and things and the deals he was making with the German people, like, oh, give us your money, buy a bond for a car, the Volkswagen Beetle. And industrialists were asked, he's not paying you anything. Why are you able to do this? Why are you even accepting this? And they're like, well, he's just printing money. But if he had asked the German people to build if it had been anything other than military spending, they wouldn't have bought it.
Yeah.
But because it was military spending, he was able to get the
Yeah.
economy
I
going.
mean, that's the disturbing thing.
It is hard. You said consciousness is a gift.
Well, I mean,
it's also, you know,
well, I mean, I say we're capable of it. I mean, the other thing is we're capable of these tribal
fear and loathing.
fear and loathing, where we're so easily manipulated by ideologues and dogma
And fear.
and fear. Well,
It is,
but
that fear's the method, yes.
but it is. But I think it's probably rooted in our tribal ancestry. I mean, not in the family, not in the individual,
No.
but in the tribes. And of course, once you have the tribes and the class system and all that, then people can manipulate it, and you could have your priests and
Yeah.
popes and generals and
I think any time a leader or a president or something, or a Congress, or a more distributed form of leadership, a Congress or a parliament, if they ever declare war on or sanctions on a people, they should have to, in person, either the person himself or as a group, kill a baby to drive the point home.
Yeah.
You know, all these levels of abstraction we put in between our actions and the consequences of them, because it's happening to them. It's so abstract.
yeah.
Our sanctions on Iraq killed 1 million Iraqi children between 1991 and 2001, just
Yeah.
from the sanctions. A
Yeah.
million.
Yeah.
1 million dead children, you know. But you could sit there and get one of these national security folks to just equivocate and blather, and how many abstractions does it take to overcome that pile of bodies?
Yeah.
Not infinite, it seems.
Oh, we were divinely designed, right? I mean, think about it.
If we were built in God's image, I don't want to meet God.
Same here. I mean, natural selection
Yeah.
did though produce this species.
Yeah.
Capable of awe and love and reason, social. When I say reason, I don't mean rationality. Other species have some.
Oh, sure.
This is reasoning and rationality, I guess, but this social ability to care for each other and to construct knowledge which is based on evidence.
Yeah.
But that's the humanist manifesto, you know?
Yeah.
And we're in the minority.
Yeah. It would be. It's strange to try to parse out cause and effect in the long run, because in the end, your identity determines your choices, and you don't have any choice over your identity.
Yeah.
You know, the history that brought you there, and so you see certain. I mean, Assyria is a really good example. I really like Assyria as a historical example to talk about, because it's not well known, and so there aren't very many stereotypes about it. It's very easy to mentally picture a Roman, because we're always blabbing about them.
Well, we've seen Cleopatra in all those movies.
Yeah, sure. But if I asked somebody to picture an Assyrian, most of them couldn't bring up the mental image. But Assyria was, big beard, isn't it? It is.
Yeah.
But they were kind of Rome before Rome. They had, for 300 years, they were the power of the Middle East, and they united it, and they came very close to becoming Rome until they failed. And so you think of how hard they worked and how many men died to keep Assyria strong and ascendant, and then it just went away. It was just gone as a political unit. And I think about the scale of the environmental catastrophes coming towards us. It's like looking at this ever-building tsunami. And I think about how the loyalty of people to the idea of America, I think, has already been broken. I really do. I ask people, like, do you believe in America? And most of them say no, or they kind of shrug and equivocate, and I'm like, oh, really? That's the thing that's gonna dominate this century? An ideology that doesn't even carry clout in its homeland, in its heartland? is the American dream really about eating beef? Is that what they're trading it for? Because it seems to be the case.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
You can't. What are you going to ask the American people to sacrifice for? And by sacrifice, I mean sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, most Americans have never honestly confronted their history anyway.
No.
The slavery, the racism of treating the Aboriginals, the destruction of the environment, and the power of money. I mean, they really haven't.
And how lucky we were.
Yeah.
You know, I think of Russia as a good counterexample to that, because ostensibly on the surface, the history seems similar.
Yeah.
They both have these enormous frontiers, similar latitude, and a similar aspect of, America started in the east and spread west. Russia started in the west and spread east.
Yeah.
They have a resource base that's astonishing, that any other country could scarcely dream of. And they're both militarily unassailable.
Yeah.
But beyond that, Russia's pretty damn different.
Yeah.
The foundations of their civilization are just so much deeper than our own.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they're able to meet the challenges of this century, but I don't think America can.
Yeah. And you've said that before, both they and China.
Yeah.
Well, to come back to the ocean, one of the reasons I decided to retire from teaching when I did, and I taught evolution and oceanography as well as a lot of other stuff, was in the biological oceanography class at the end of the spring semester. I'd have a lot of seniors in there. I'd get to the human impact on the ocean, and it was so depressing to be telling these students, and I would ask myself, is it just me? I'm getting old, and am I the doomsday sign on my, this sort of thing, or I want to. Somebody younger should be teaching them. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Maybe they'd be able to make the point better, because I wasn't sure I could. And the longer I've been retired, the more I realize that most students aren't in college to learn anyway. Yeah. I mean, I didn't really recognize it while I was teaching until I retired. I mean, it was after that I started thinking, that everybody admires the American education system, but I don't know. I think it's better than the Chinese education system in many ways, but it's. I'm with that group that we've got to inspire awe, wonder, and an appreciation for the fact that we're all stuck in history. We can make a difference for the future. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's hard to recognize when you're not bored with something yourself. It's difficult to appreciate. How could you not be interested in this? Look at this. So here, let's end on a positive note. What's your favorite sea beast, living or dead, extinct or non-extinct?
Almost. The way I'd answer that is the one I'm watching on David Attenborough at the time.
Sure.
I mean, you understand that. I've seen things on there with the fish are doing and octopus are doing. I had no idea, and they've caught it on video.
Yeah.
I mean, fish catching birds, seals catching tuna. I mean,
seals catch tuna?
Yeah, sea lions in the Galapagos. These sea lions trap these tuna, and there's this one that was a leader. It's on the Blue Planet.
Oh, no fucking way.
No.
That's news to me.
So my favorite.
Oh, dude.
I
swum with sea lions in the Galapagos.
No, they have this episode that's just that blows your mind.
Yeah.
And of course, you always have to go back to the big whales you've been close to. I've been close to orcas and humpbacks and stuff like that. But my honest answer is to encourage people to watch the Blue Planet or anything on Nature or the BBC. Whatever I'm watching on David. Sure. I mean, they show amazing things.
Have you know about the raptorial sperm whales, right? They're extinct now. So I pulled it up. I pulled this one up just for you. But they're in the sperm whale family. They were found. Their fossils were fairly recently found off the coast of South America.
Okay.
And I think they have the biggest non-tusk vertebrate teeth ever. So we know sperm whales only have teeth on their lower mandible, and they hunt. They dive deep and hunt squid and stuff, and they have that big melon that they don't know Maybe it stuns prey, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
But in the oceans a couple million years ago, there were types of sperm whales that evolved to hunt other whales.
Yeah.
And they have teeth on both of their mandibles.
Oh my gosh.
And so imagine a big, they call it the Leviathan Leviathan, the Hebrew word for Leviathan. And they were as big as an adult sperm whale, and they hunted other whales. And the idea of that, so it's because they breathe oxygen, they could be faster than like a megalodon shark, right? And they're stronger because they're a mammal, you know. They probably have a similar bite force, but they're more, because they have access to that oxygen and they're not dependent on dissolved oxygen in the water, they can just do more metabolically.
Yeah.
And the idea of this, I mean, just think of the almost serenity of being an absolute apex predator of the ocean like that. Literally nothing threatens you.
Nothing threatens you.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are sitting there running down things like humpback whales and killing them and eating them. Imagine the accompanying flock of seagulls and seabirds that would just surround this beast, this thing, you know. Their brains are like 5 times bigger than ours. You know, they're like as big as your arm span, right? And imagine just like the fear of other whales in the ocean, you know, like unfathomable. You're looking at the jaws.
I'm not aware of this.
Yeah. That's the biggest one. There were several others that were smaller, more like orca size. But the humans didn't drive them extinct. They went out because the oceans changed
a long time ago. Well, we still have the orcas today.
Unbelievable.
And the great whites are afraid of them. I mean, they chase them out in South Africa. They've shown where this one group of orcas, because orcas specialize.
Yeah.
And they just disappear. Yeah. And I mean, the first orca I ever saw, I was working in southeastern Alaska. I was 19 or 20 years old. I had to move a boat 20 miles out from one place on Admiralty Island, which is also a lot of brown bears. And it was getting evening. And I take this boat and start moving down the inlet, and all of a sudden these orcas came next to me. Well, I call them killer whales. They scared the pee out of me. And so I started edging my boat towards the shore. I think they were just being curious, and then they took off on their own. And I mean, but orcas are... So my favorite one might be the orca, I guess, but not because it's a high-level predator, just because it's such a magnificent social beast. Orcas, like humans, the females go through menopause. Man, that's a hard evolutionary thing to explain. And and they help us understand how it happened in humans and elephants, because these older females could help their grandchildren. So that might be my favorite.
One of the questions Luke asked me, I think in the first episode, is, are whales persons? Are they human? You know, and I said yes, they're non-human persons. You know, because maybe they don't have a full language the way we do, but they have individuality and they have names. And they talk to each other, you know.
And they recognize each other as individuals.
They are individuals.
Yeah, sure.
There was the one, I think it was in New Zealand, it was a big old bull orca who helped them herd whales and fish, you know, and he learned to do it on his own. He sat there and watched what people were doing, observed them hunting whales, and went, okay. And the humans knew, the humans caught on, and they were like, he would help herd them into those fjords, you know. And he was damn useful. He was like a border collie for whales. And it seems like I'm making this up, you know, but I'm not. This is the world we live in.
The world is full of wonderful things. It really is.
I really like the peacock mantid shrimp. You know, that little guy? Oh, man. Could you imagine if that was big?
Oh, boy.
Big as an orca, this terrifying mantis with those raptorial claws. Oh, man. You know, the smaller you get, the more cool it gets. To be honest, you know, like the different lifestyles, the different, you know, mantis shrimps can see spectrums of light we don't even.
No. That's just my favorite. I love them all.
Of course. Yeah.
I mean, if people would ask me now how would I describe myself, I would describe myself professionally as a natural historian. And I include humans in that natural history, by the way, to a great degree. But I mean, natural history. It just it gets me excited.
Yeah.
I mean, I can watch, like I say, I can watch these nature programs. I can see them again and again. The Blue
Yeah.
Planet, you've got to see that one. You've been to
Yeah.
the Galapagos.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
The sea lion actually called in its
That's nuts.
its pod mates,
Yeah.
and they went after and caught these yellowfin
Huh.
like this.
I was snorkeling one time, and it was one of those situations. The water was clear at that area. The sun was very bright, and like I'm just kind of looking down, and it's difficult to tell how deep it is.
Yeah.
You know, because it's sort of an optical illusion, but it has more to do with just it's such an unfamiliar environment.
Yeah.
So I'm looking around and clumsily swimming, and this big bull sea lion came up from underneath me and like practically brushed my face. Like my vision just went dark, and I just about shit myself. Just woof, you know.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had a close encounter with that.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that with a wolf eel in
Oh,
scuba
wow.
diving.
Cool.
Yeah, in Under the Narrows a long time ago.
Oh,
and
neat. Yeah.
and I mean, with the orcas, I've been very close to bears.
Yeah.
I mean, really close,
Yeah.
within inches.
Yeah.
But it's always a thrill. But you know, I mean, and plants. I mean,
Yeah.
I was just thinking, oh, you should ask me what's the most sublime experience I've ever had.
What's the most sublime experience, Mike?
I was on a cruise off of Southern California or northern Mexico. It was a quiet night, swells coming in. It was dark, and as is my wont, I like to go out in the bow, and it's dark, and I could hear this, these porpoises riding the bow waves, and the Noctiluca, these luminescent algae, dinoflagellates. They were completely silhouetted in the lights from this thing.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? I mean,
Mm.
so that's one of the most sublime. It is the most sublime experience I've ever had, and where I was surfing that bow wave with those dinoflagellates and porpoises. I mean, I was totally absorbed. Cool. That's probably enough.